Is Putin losing his grip on power? There are murmurings that all is not well in the Kremlin. A recent intelligence report claims the Russian president has tightened his security more than ever, fearing assassination attempts and even a coup. But could the man in the Kremlin's days really be numbered? Or is this an attempt to shape the narrative?
Because Russia has the upper hand, because Russia is consolidated, because time is in Putin's favor. And I think that there is some dissatisfaction with that idea.
I want to get beyond the speculation and look at what we actually know. Is there something genuinely new or different going on in Moscow right now? To help me separate fact from fiction is Sam Greene, Professor of Russian Politics at King's College London.
I think the report is probably accurate to a large extent in that it's pointing to a Kremlin that is primarily concerned with security of the guy at the top, right, of Vladimir Putin. We've known for a long time that Putin is overwhelmingly concerned with his own security, that he's paranoid about particularly attacks coming from within the elite, but of course, from Ukraine as well. And that he really organizes his life and the life of everybody around him in the service of that, right? We remember the pictures back from COVID, right, when he was sitting at the far end of a very long table from everybody else. We know it's very difficult to get into meetings with him because he is security oriented, right? And that he really hides from the world to a large extent. As a result of that, he's avoided public appearances, except when absolutely necessary for a long time.
So if the security concerns aren't exactly new, what else might be putting pressure on the Kremlin? In September, Russia faces parliamentary elections, and even in an authoritarian state, those still mean something.
This is an authoritarian country, but that does not mean that elections don't matter. It's a stress test for the regime, and it's actually in a lot of ways a more complicated test than it would be if it were, say, an election for Putin, because Putin is popular. He's not as popular as he used to be a couple of months ago, but he's still, 70-75% approval rating, pretty good. United Russia as the ruling party never enjoys the kind of popularity that Putin does, right? Putin keeps a distance, and he keeps the party at a distance because it's the party at the end of the day that he wants to take the blame for anything that goes wrong in the economy, in people's lives, and not him, right? So at the same time, that party has to go and win a large majority in the Duma in order for him to be able to maintain the structure and the flow of power, the way that the system works.
But it's not just internal politics creating pressure. There's a bigger argument playing out in Western capitals too, about whether Putin is actually winning this war and what the optics of all this mean for Ukraine.
I think there is a narrative element to this, right? There has been this sense in sort of the public debate coming from some politicians in the West as well that, really we need to look for some kind of a compromise in Ukraine, one that would see Ukraine maybe sacrifice territory and really sacrifice its security in order to end this war, because Russia has the upper hand, because Russia is consolidated, because time is in Putin's favor. And I think that there is some dissatisfaction with that idea, right? I think that intelligence services in particular feel that this may not really line up with the reality that they believe that they're seeing on the ground in Russia. And so they're trying to push back against that sense of sort of fatalism to a certain extent.
So where does that leave Putin's support closer to home? Starting with the people who arguably matter the most right now, the military.
The military, of course, is fairly happy, right? There have been problems, and there continue to be problems. We're seeing purges of some of the top brass and some of the top officials, civilian officials within the Ministry of Defense and the Defense Industrial Complex because of issues of politics as well as issues of genuine corruption. That doesn't make anybody happy, but the military is flying very much higher than it was before. It has not limitless funding, but more funding than it could have imagined before, and it occupies a structurally more important role in the system than it had just a few years ago.
The most dramatic test of that loyalty came in June 2023, when Wagner mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin marched his forces on Moscow. It didn't end well for him. His plane came down 2 months later in circumstances that surprised nobody. But what did that whole episode really tell us about Putin's grip on power?
When what you're trying to do is to use force of arms to hand the president the head of his defense minister on a silver platter, of course, the president's going to interpret that as threatening. And we saw that, right? It led to at the end of the day, the end of Prigozhin's life on Earth, right? But it, I think, is a symbol of a broader challenge, right? Which is that sometimes these incentive structures can split. They can come apart at the seams, and Putin can find himself scrambling to create new ones. Right. I think the biggest challenge for Putin was not that somebody like Prigozhin rose up and tried to change things, but that the rest of this system, right, that should have been there to defend him, didn't defend him. Right? It sat on the fence and waited to see what was going to happen. Is Putin going to survive? Is Putin not going to survive? And then they made their decisions about where to come down once they saw how things were developing. And I think that's why we've seen some of these purges in and around the military apparatus, because they're trying to create a bit more incentive for proactive loyalty.
So the military is largely on side, even if some persuasion was needed. What about the other powerful players, the oligarchs? Do they still have any real sway?
The oligarchs, I almost think we need to stop calling them oligarchs, to be honest. Oligarchy sort of suggests that these people have a say in what goes on. And I think what we've seen over the course of the last 4 years is that these people don't have much power, right? They have a lot of money and they have a lot of privilege. And of course, none of them are complaining about that. They have benefited in some ways from the war because it's created new opportunities to get money out of the state budget, right? They've pivoted away from finance and technology and into things like defense and sanctions evasion and other ways of making money. There's been a lot of redistribution, and a lot of people have become richer as the result also of the opportunity to grab Western assets and Ukrainian assets through the course of this conflict. But they have become much less autonomous and much less powerful than they were before the war started and before sanctions kicked in. And they've really not done anything about it. We haven't seen people running for the borders. We haven't seen people defecting to the opposition. We haven't seen people really trying to challenge the Kremlin. We've seen people, again, accommodating themselves to the new circumstances that they find themselves in.
What about ordinary Russians? Is the country as a whole actually better off than before the war?
No, it's not. I mean, economically, people's lives are more difficult than they were before. Russia's economy has not collapsed. It's had to adapt, and it's been the economic managers have been relatively successful at that adaptation. But it comes at a cost, right? It comes at the cost of development and investment. It comes at the cost of increased cost of living for ordinary Russians, increased cost of capital for Russian businesses. It's made the Russian economy much more brittle and much narrower than it otherwise would have been. And it comes at a cost of security as well, right? Russia, at least ostensibly, launched this war in order to keep Ukraine out of NATO. And while Ukraine may not join NATO anytime in the near future, NATO, in a very real sense, is in Ukraine. It's providing armaments that would not have been at Ukraine's disposal if it had not been for this war. There is a degree of integration, security integration between Ukraine and Europe in particular, that increasingly European leaders and publics even see Ukrainian security as central to Europe's own security, right? So in that sense, Russia has made itself very much worse off than it was in, say, January 2022.
People have been claiming that Russia is on the brink of economic collapse for almost a decade now. So is that where the country is actually headed now?
Is Russia about to run out of money? No. Right. Is Russia at the end of its fiscal resources? No. Russia exports natural resources that the world needs. So even if those natural resources aren't going to Europe, which most of them aren't at this point, right? They find willing buyers in India, in China, really throughout the rest of the world. And in fact, Europe and the United States need that to happen, because otherwise it increases the cost of all of these resources for them as well, to a level that would be unmanageable, right? So Russia has opportunities here that, say, an Iran or a North Korea doesn't have when it comes to protecting itself against sanctions. But Russia has to manage its economy like everybody else. It operates in financial markets, both domestically and globally. It's doing so in a way that's much more restricted. And so when it needs to borrow, when it runs into financial headwinds the way that any country can in the modern world, right, it can face a crisis. And that crisis can, from time to time, overwhelm the capacity of the central bank and the finance ministry to deal with that crisis. We haven't reached that point yet. But the liquidity and the resources that the Russian system has to play with are, again, not at the crisis point that we might see in an Iran or a Venezuela, right? But they are very much more threadbare than they were 4 years ago.
This brings us to the question of the deal ordinary Russians have with the Kremlin. Is it really as simple as Putin delivers stability and people stay out of politics?
I think for ordinary Russians, it's not so simple, right, as this idea that Putin gives them some prosperity and stability and they agree to stay out of politics. I think what we've actually seen really throughout Putin's time in office has been a very different kind of arrangement, right? One in which ordinary citizens are left alone to live their lives, right, and to build for themselves whatever they can, sometimes with more difficulty and prosperity, and sometimes with greater ease or conflict, depending on their personal circumstances. But they keep the state at a distance, and the state sort of does its own thing, right? Makes itself rich, makes the oligarchs rich, as long as it stays out of the way of ordinary Russian citizens who, by and large, don't actually find the state to be terribly useful. They understand that it's corrupt. They understand it's not efficient and effective. For the oligarchs, even if they're upset, and I think we've seen a lot of indication or some indication over the last several years that they are not very happy with the war or the way that things are being governed. And again, how could they be, right? It's made them less powerful and to a certain extent less rich. But what are their options? Right? If they pull down Putin, right, they are left with a very different, potentially political system, right? One that they might struggle to control, one that might put themselves face to face with the Russian public, who might have varying opinions about Putin, but none of them have great opinions about the oligarchs, right? Most of them would rather take these people and take away all of their property, string them up from a lamppost, and start again, right? So they are in a bind, right? They're caught between an unpleasant but fairly, manageable current situation, and a future that is really very uncertain and potentially very dangerous.
And yet, for all that dissatisfaction among the public, among the elites, none of it has coalesced into any real opposition, partly because nobody has been offered a credible alternative.
Putin understands instinctively that as soon as an alternative emerges, right, people will begin to weigh that cost and benefit, right, of change, and that calculation may not come out in his favor, and so he's been very, very careful to avoid anybody looking like they might be an alternative, even somebody that he would think of as loyal, right? So whenever there's been a discussion of succession, he holds those cards very close to his chest because he doesn't want the system to begin to orient itself around a possible future. He will monopolize power until his power or his life are over, and those two might be the same thing. But the bigger challenge, I think, for the system is not coming up with an alternative, right? An alternative will present itself at the time that people begin to really lose faith in the ability of this system to continue. The question is, what is it that actually causes people to lose faith? It's hard to explain to people that if you voted or mobilized or rose up into the streets, right, to create some kind of a different political outcome, that it would actually make life better. And if we go back, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of Russian history, even into the late Soviet period, there's not a lot of indication that changes of power actually make people's lives better.
And Putin has been very deliberate about that, not just suppressing alternatives at home, but cutting Russia off from the outside world in a way that limits people's sense of what's even possible. How does that isolation actually work in his favor?
And what he found was that there was a significant constituency, particularly younger people, particularly in the major cities, white-collar workers, well-educated people who had really begun to integrate themselves into a European lifestyle, and who were beginning to try to transform cultural spaces, but also political spaces in Russia in a way that would make Russia feel very much more European. At the same time, they were using access to Europe. People, particularly, the richer people, were using access to Europe as a way of insulating themselves from what was going on in Russia. And so, in putting Russia into this, as he puts it, an existential conflict with Europe, in particular, what he's done is he's cut people off from those escape mechanisms. He's cut people off from those sources of autonomy, but also from those sources of ideas about what a different future could look like for Russia, and force people themselves to make a choice. Where either you leave, which hundreds of thousands of people have done, right, or you stay. But then you understand that your future is here, and it will be created here.
Back to our top question. Is there any new information here that suggests that the Russian president is truly on his way out?
I don't see anything happening that feels like a challenge that we haven't seen before, or that feels that it's insurmountable for the Kremlin. Of course, there are challenges, right? And eventually the Kremlin will make a mistake, or eventually some of these challenges will come together in a way that becomes unexpectedly problematic. If I can see that coming, the Kremlin can see it coming, right? If it's going to be something the Kremlin can't see coming and can't fix, right, the likelihood is we're not going to see it coming either, right? So I'm going to continue for the time being to predict that things will remain stable, and I will be right until I'm wrong.
Stable until it isn't. Perhaps the most honest verdict anyone can give on Putin's Russia right now. But we want to hear from you. Do you think the rumors of instability in the Kremlin actually point to something real? Or is this just the usual noise that surrounds any long-serving leader? Give us your take in the comments. I'm Hannah Hummel. Thank you so much for watching.